Number 1. I am female, and this story takes place in 1993, when I and my twin sister CJ were both 9. Our next door neighbor was a witch. We fully believed that growing up. One time we drove our Barbie Jeep down the sidewalk, and she called the cops on us for being on her property. To the adults, she was just a mean old lady, but to my sister and I, she was a witch, and the subject of many late-night flashlight under the blanket ghost stories. Needless to say, nobody was incredibly sad when she passed away. Her son kept the house, not planning to sell. He visited once in a while, and the house turned a little scraggly, to my parents' dismay. The adults never noticed the strange things that occurred in the meantime, but CJ and I sure did. The witch had a huge backyard, more than 500 feet. It was overgrown, and our backyard had tall bushes hiding most of it from view. But we would notice strange things like lawn chairs and blankets folded and shoved behind a rock and food bags. We told ourselves that it was the witch's ghost. Fast forward to summer, and there was wild lavender growing in the backyard. We wanted it pretty badly to make crowns and such, but our parents had forbade us from going in there. One day we got lucky. Dad was running some errands, and Mom was sitting in the front room taking a nap because of a migraine. She banished us to our backyard. CJ was wearing her pink overall shorts. This is important to remember. There were no parents in sight, and we were up and over the witch's 6-foot chain-link fence in a matter of seconds. And 2 minutes later, we were engrossed in weaving flower braids. We heard a dry, raspy cough coming from a blue tarp, and to our horror and dismay, we then noticed it started to rustle and shake, and then he emerged. A huge man with scraggly red hair, dirty sweatpants and jean jacket. He was exposed and playing with himself. Well, I was frozen to the ground, and it wasn't until CJ screamed that I realized he had started to move towards us. I started running, practically flew over the fence, but one of CJ's overall straps got stuck. An almighty tug ripped it as she came tumbling over. Her forehead connected with my nose and it shattered. We flew into the house, and I heard wild laughing coming from the other side of the fence. Mom was promptly woken up. The police were called. Inspection of the backyard turned up nothing, except over 50 photos of CJ and I. We never saw that man again. Number 2. I grew up in a suburb of LA County in Southern California. It had a very small Midwestern town type of feel. Nothing like you get near the city of Los Angeles. I'm female and I was about 9 years old at the time. It was the mid-1980s. My parents had bought a house a couple of years prior that was built in the 1930s. There was a playhouse in the backyard that resembled the main house. It was probably a little over 5 feet high when you walked into it. It was just a room built with the same materials as the house. It had a real roof, walls, plaster, carpet, windows, door, etc. The original owners obviously had built it for children. My best friend lived next door, and she was a couple of years older than me. Well, we had talked about spending the night at this playhouse for about a year, and we finally got up the nerve to do it. My dad set everything up for us. He put a battery-operated light in there and cleaned it up a bit. To give you an idea of what the yard was like, there were 2 large orange trees that had dropped several leaves around the yard. The yard was fenced in. There was a detached garage that led to the back alley, and a woodshed next to the playhouse that had a gate that also led out to the alley. Around the side of the house, there was a shorter gate about 3 feet high that led to the front yard. Everything was very old. We never really closed the door leading from the yard to the garage all the way because it was old and swollen, and you had to slam its shutter open if you latched it. We would just close it enough to where it would stick a little, but we never pulled it shut all the way. The small gate on the side of the house that led to the front yard was also hard to open or close. You had to lift it up to really get it to move because it would stick to the ground. So nighttime rolls around and we're set up with our sleeping bags, having a great time playing Mad Libs and listening to the radio. All the while we stopped several times thinking that we heard someone walking around outside. A couple of times I called out for my dad because it sounded like the footsteps of a heavier person. My dad is 6'3". No one answered, and it wasn't uncommon for us to get spooked because we were both nuts for horror films. Usually I would open the door and look outside, but something just creeped me out enough to where I didn't want to do that. We tried looking out the windows, but we had the light on so we couldn't see very well. Being as young as we were, we didn't think to turn off the light so we could see out better without being seen. We sort of just brushed it off like we were probably scaring ourselves, like we usually did. We finally decided to turn off the radio and the light and just lay there getting ready to go to sleep. Shortly after we did, we both sort of bolted up in our sleeping bags and started to say to each other, "Okay, someone is really out there." We honestly just sat there grabbing onto each other listening. We had a small terrier, but we ruled out that it was her pretty quickly. First, you could hear, even from my friend's house next door, every time the dog came in and out of the dog door. It was metal and would swing several times and was really annoying, and we hadn't heard the dog come out. Second, the footsteps that we heard on the leaves were not from a dog. They were not from a child either. They were from someone older. We kept hearing it, and they got closer to the playhouse, stopped, then start again and get further away. This went on for what felt like 20 minutes, but it was probably closer to 5. When finally it sounds like all hell breaks loose. We hear the dog come out of the dog door and begin barking as if she's snapping right at someone's heels. Then we hear the side gate leading to the front yard, the one that you have to pick up where it drags on the ground open. We hear it drag. We immediately dart out of the door of the playhouse and see that the gate is open, and also see the dog running out. The dog couldn't have opened the gate regardless. However, even if she could, a dog would push the gate open. The gate had been pulled open toward the backyard. We just started running out toward the front yard. My friend was in front of me. The dog was way ahead of us at this point, and we couldn't see her anymore. What I noticed while I was running was the door leading from the backyard to the garage was open. Not wide open, it was only ajar about 4 to 5 inches. When I got to where the side gate was, I heard the garage door slam shut. We kept running and saw the dog coming back toward the front yard. My friend grabbed her and we started ringing the front doorbell frantically. In all this commotion, my friend and I had both commented that it could have been my parents playing a joke on us, trying to scare us. That was clearly not the case. My mom came to the door half asleep and very confused about why we were out front with the dog. My dad was sleeping upstairs. It was odd for him to be home at night, but he had been on vacation, which is one of the reasons he was so willing to take the time to set up the playhouse for us. We woke up my dad to check things out, and when we all went to the backyard, the garage door was still shut. There were 2 people out in the yard with us. One clearly ran out the side gate when the dog came out, and the other most likely had hidden in the garage and watched us run off. We figured they probably exited the garage, slamming the door shut, then went out the other gate or jumped the fence heading out to the alley. My parents were a bit skeptical of this story. I honestly think that for a few minutes they thought we were goofing around. Again, we were big-time horror fans and loved being scared, often scaring each other. Then my mom swore it was probably my friend's younger brother trying to scare us. They decided not to call the police. The next day though, my mom called my friend's mom. They were best friends, and her mom was a bit creeped out by this because she said her son was home with her the entire night and he was only 10 at the time. He wasn't part of any prank on us. We talk about it to this day with our parents, and they feel now that they should have called the police, but hindsight is 20/20, I guess. I also want to add that we lived in a really nice neighborhood, but our street seemed to be the cutoff point. Our side of the street was lined with some pretty decent homes, while across the street were a bunch of small apartment buildings with at least 4 units each. Sometimes you would run into some pretty shady people who lived in these apartments. My theory is that someone in one of these apartments across the street had made our way back into our place. I could be wrong, but it does seem like the only explanation. Number 3. As a kid, I liked to sit on my little mini playground, as I used to call it, and read. I actually look back on this and laugh, as now I'm a lot more isolated and an indoor person. My dad got home around 6, so my mom took us to and from school. When my mom was parking her car, she pointed out a creepy guy in a car in front of hers. He was just looking at us. She ushered us inside and brushed it up to just a weird coincidence or something like that. She still kept a close eye on me from the kitchen window, but she had to do something and left the kitchen. Now my mom was cautious because she had a creepy experience with a pedophile herself. From the top of the platform I was on next to the slide, I suddenly saw a strange man in our backyard. Upon noticing him, the man spoke. I don't remember what it was, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey kiddo, I have some Goosebumps books in my car if you want to read them with me." My mom and dad had drilled stranger danger into my head, and I was a really smart kid for my age, so I tried to tell the guy off myself. I know, stupid decision, but I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. The guy kept insisting that I come read with him, and I kept saying no. Eventually, the guy pretended to get a cell phone call and claim it was from my mom. He told me she said to get into his car, and he'll take me to the bookstore. I knew that there was no reason for her to ask someone to take me somewhere, so I just ignored him. He began to approach me. This was before we got a fence, so I was out in the open. He grabbed my arm and dragged me to his car, but just then, as God himself gave me a miracle, a police car came down the road and saw what he was doing. The guy let me go and sped off. The officer chased him and eventually caught him. My mom came rushing out when she heard the sirens. The guy claimed to be my dad and that my mom was abusing me. The officer knew my family well and called his bluff. I'm seriously glad that officer was there just then. I can't explain it in any other way than a miracle, because if he hadn't been there, I very well could have been abducted by a pedophile and never heard from again. There's always a reason to be afraid.